High standards change how people treat you. Most people think respect is something you demand. They believe if they explain themselves better, work harder, or tolerate more, people will eventually treat them well. But psychology shows the opposite. People don't treat you based on how much you give. They treat you based on what you tolerate. High standards are not about being demanding. They are about being clear about what you allow, clear about what you accept, clear about what you walk away from, and that clarity silently reshapes behavior around you. The moment you raise your standards, something uncomfortable happens. Some people feel challenged, some feel exposed, some feel pushed away. Not because you changed toward them, but because you stopped adjusting away from yourself. High standards remove confusion. They tell the world, this is how I operate. This is what I accept. This is what I don't negotiate. And people respond to that immediately, not verbally. Behaviorally, this is why people with high standards rarely need to explain themselves. Their behavior already does. They don't chase respect. They don't demand better treatment. They don't correct everyone. They simply withdraw access when standards aren't met. And withdrawal is the loudest message of all. Another uncomfortable truth. Low standards invite familiarity. High standards invite consideration. When everything is allowed, nothing is valued. When access is conditional, behavior improves. This is not arrogance, this is psychology. People rise to the level you require or remove themselves. Both outcomes are correct. This video is not about being harsh. It's not about being cold. It's not about superiority. It's about alignment. By the end of this video, you will understand why raising standards changes people's tone and effort. Why some people leave when standards rise, why high standards feel lonely at first, and how calm, consistent standards create natural respect. High standards are not rules you announce. They are boundaries you enforce quietly. And once you understand how they work, you stop asking, why do people treat me like this? Because the answer becomes obvious. Stay with me. Because once your standards change, everything around you must either adjust or fall away. Why low standards invite disrespect without you realizing it. Low standards rarely look like weakness. They look like kindness. They look like patience. They look like understanding. And that is why they are so dangerous. Most people don't realize they have low standards. They believe they are simply being easygoing. They think they are being mature by tolerating more. But psychology shows something uncomfortable. Disrespect does not begin with cruelty. It begins with permission. Low standards are silent permissions. They tell people, it's okay to be late. It's okay to cross this line. It's okay to give less effort. Not through words, but through repeated allowance. Human behavior adapts quickly. When there are no consequences, there is no adjustment. And when there is no adjustment, behavior deteriorates. This is why disrespect rarely appears suddenly. It arrives slowly, first as small dismissals, then as delayed responses, then as reduced effort, then as entitlement. And by the time it feels obvious, it feels personal. But it was never personal. It was structural. Another critical truth, people do not consciously decide to disrespect you. They respond to the environment you create. If the environment rewards overstepping, inconsistency, minimal effort, then those behaviors increase. This is basic behavioral psychology. Low standards create an environment where effort is optional and respect is unnecessary. Another reason low standards invite disrespect is confused hierarchy. When you tolerate everything, people don't know where you stand. Unclear standards create ambiguity. Ambiguity invites testing. Testing escalates until a boundary appears. If no boundary appears, disrespect becomes normal. Another uncomfortable truth. Low standards train people to delay accountability. When you accept excuses, excuses multiply. When you forgive patterns, patterns continue. When you explain your boundaries repeatedly, they stop being boundaries. They become suggestions, and suggestions are rarely respected. Another psychological factor is over-availability. Low standards often show up as constant accessibility, always replying, always adjusting, always accommodating. Availability without limits signals low perceived value. Not because you lack value, but because value requires scarcity. Scarcity does not mean absence, it means selectivity. Another important realization. Low standards often come from fear of conflict, fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood. So people tolerate behavior they internally resent. But resentment does not correct behavior. It leaks through tone, body language, and emotional withdrawal. People feel it and lose respect even faster. Another subtle effect of low standards is self-betrayal. Every time you tolerate what violates you, you teach yourself that your comfort is negotiable. And people mirror that lesson. They don't disrespect you because they are bad people. They disrespect you because your behavior taught them it was allowed. Another important point. Low standards don't just affect others, they change you. You become reactive. You explain more, you justify longer, you tolerate frustration silently. This internal erosion shows up externally as weakened presence. And presence is what people respond to first. The most important realization of this part is this. People don't rise to what you want. They adjust to what you allow. Low standards are not harmless. They are instructions. And once those instructions are learned, changing them requires clarity and consistency, which is exactly what the next part will address. Why high standards feel uncomfortable at first. Raising your standards does not feel empowering at first. It feels uncomfortable, awkward, even lonely. And this discomfort makes many people retreat before real change begins. Psychology explains why. High standards disrupt familiar dynamics. For a long time, people learned how to interact with you based on your tolerance. They knew how late they could be, how little effort was acceptable, how far they could push. When standards rise, those rules disappear, and uncertainty creates discomfort for both sides. Another critical truth: high standards challenge expectations, not people. But most people experience challenged expectations as personal rejection. They think, why are they different now? Why are they harder to deal with? Why can't they just be easy like before? This reaction is not about you becoming difficult. It's about others losing convenience. Convenience is comfortable. Standards are demanding. Demanding not in effort, but in consistency. Another reason high standards feel uncomfortable is internal. You are breaking an old habit, self-adjustment. For a long time, you may have explained yourself, softened boundaries, lowered expectations to keep peace. Raising standards means you stop doing that. And stopping self-adjustment feels like confrontation, even when no words are spoken. Another psychological reason for discomfort is fear of loss. When standards rise, some connections weaken. Some people pull back, some disengage, some disappear. This can feel like rejection. But it is not rejection of you. It is rejection of the old access. High standards expose who was connected to you and who was connected to convenience. Another important factor: high standards remove emotional shortcuts. Before, people relied on guilt, urgency, excuses to maintain access. When standards rise, those shortcuts stop working. And when tools stop working, people feel frustrated. Frustration often gets misdirected at you, but frustration is not proof you are wrong. It is proof that the system changed. Another uncomfortable realization: high standards force you to tolerate silence. Less messages, less noise, less engagement. Silence feels empty at first because you are used to constant interaction. But constant interaction is not the same as respect. Respect often arrives quietly. Another internal discomfort comes from identity shift. You may think, am I becoming cold? Am I being unfair? Is this selfish? These thoughts are normal. They come from old conditioning that equated self-respect with selfishness. But selfishness takes. Standards filter. Filtering improves quality, not ego. Another important point: high standards feel uncomfortable because they require consistency. You can't raise standards once and drop them the next day. Inconsistency invites testing. Testing creates stress. Consistency creates calm, but only after adjustment. Another psychological truth: the discomfort phase is temporary. It exists between the old normal collapsing and the new normal stabilizing. Many people quit here because they mistake discomfort for failure. But discomfort is evidence of change. The most important realization of this part is this: high standards don't feel wrong. They feel unfamiliar. And unfamiliar always feels uncomfortable before it feels right. If you can remain calm during this phase, everything else begins to adjust around you. Our high standards automatically improve people's behavior. High standards don't work because you explain them. They work because behavior adapts to structure. This is one of the most misunderstood ideas in psychology. People think others change because they are persuaded, convinced, or emotionally moved. In reality, people change because the environment changes. And high standards change the environment immediately. When standards are low, effort is optional. When standards rise, effort becomes required. Not demanded, required. Another important truth. People behave better when they know access is conditional. Conditional does not mean cruel. It means clear. Clear standards remove guesswork. People know what effort is expected, what behavior is acceptable, what happens if standards are not met. This clarity alone improves behavior. Another psychological mechanism at work is cost awareness. When standards are low, the cost of poor behavior is zero. When standards are high, the cost becomes visible, not through threats but through withdrawal. When access is reduced, attention changes. People become more careful, more intentional, more respectful, not emotionally, behaviorally. Another subtle effect. High standards shift responsibility. When standards are low, you carry the burden. You remind, you adjust, you tolerate. When standards are high, responsibility moves outward. Others must meet you where you are. This reduces resentment and increases mutual effort. Another important realization. High standards eliminate entitlement. Entitlement grows where tolerance is unlimited. When everything is allowed, nothing is earned. High standards reintroduce earning. Earning creates appreciation. Appreciation creates respect. Another behavioral change is tone adjustment. People change how they speak to you when standards rise. They become more precise, more polite, more intentional. Not because they fear you, but because they sense structure. Structure creates seriousness. Seriousness invites respect. Another key point, high standards reduce testing. People test boundaries when boundaries are unclear. Clear standards remove curiosity. When people know the line, they stop approaching it. Another uncomfortable truth. Some people improve their behavior, others leave. Both outcomes are success, because standards are not meant to keep everyone. They are meant to keep alignment. Another psychological effect. High standards create self-respect internally. When you enforce standards calmly, your own confidence grows. Not loud confidence, quiet certainty. That certainty is felt immediately. People respond to it instinctively. Another realization. You don't need to monitor behavior when standards are clear. You don't need to police. You don't need to argue. Behavior self-corrects or exits. This saves energy. Energy improves presence. Presence reinforces standards. It becomes a cycle. The most important realization of this part is this. High standards don't change people because you want them to. They change people because behavior adapts to consequences. And calm consequences are far more effective than emotional reactions. Why some people leave when standards rise. When standards rise, not everyone stays. And this is where many people panic. They assume, I'm being too harsh. I push people away. I did something wrong. But psychology tells a different story. People don't leave because standards are high. They leave because the old terms no longer apply. For some people, the relationship was built on access. Easy access, unlimited tolerance, low accountability. When standards rise, that access changes. And when access changes, the relationship must either evolve or end. Another uncomfortable truth. Some people were never invested in you. They were invested in what you allowed. They benefited from your flexibility, your patience, your willingness to adjust. When that benefit disappears, so does their motivation to stay. This is not rejection, it is exposure. Another psychological factor is loss of leverage. Low standards give others leverage. Emotional leverage, time leverage, expectation leverage. When standards rise, that leverage disappears. And people who relied on leverage often exit rather than adapt. Another important people who leave when standards rise are not being punished. They are self-selecting out. Healthy, aligned people adjust. Unhealthy dynamics collapse. This separation feels personal, but it is structural. Another reason people leave is identity disruption. They knew how to relate to the old version of you. The new version requires effort, respect, and clarity. Not everyone wants to upgrade how they show up. Leaving is easier than changing. Another uncomfortable reaction you may face is guilt tripping. You've changed. You're not the same anymore. You're difficult now. These statements are not observations. They are negotiations, attempts to pull you back to the old standard. Recognizing this prevents regression. Another important truth: when people leave, space opens, and space is necessary for better alignment. If low-effort people stay, high-effort people often never arrive. Standards create vacancies, and vacancies allow quality to enter. Another psychological shift: you stop measuring success by how many people stay. You measure it by who stays. Quality replaces quantity. Stability replaces chaos. Another realization: some people will leave quietly, some will leave loudly, some will test boundaries before leaving. All responses are information. None require defense. Your job is not to convince people to rise to your standards. Your job is to maintain them consistently. The most important realization of this part is this: when standards rise, losing people is not failure, it is filtration. And filtration is necessary for respect to become natural. How to maintain high standards without becoming rigid. One of the biggest fears people have about high standards is becoming rigid, cold, unapproachable, inflexible. But high standards are not rigidity. They are clarity with flexibility. Rigid people enforce rules. Grounded people maintain standards. The difference is intention. Rigidity comes from fear. Standards come from self-respect. Fear says, if I bend once, I'll lose control. Self-respect says, I know where the line is. That internal certainty allows flexibility without collapse. Another important distinction: high standards are about patterns, not moments. Rigid people react to single mistakes. People with standards observe trends. Everyone has bad days. Everyone slips occasionally. Standards are not about punishing imperfection. They are about addressing repetition. This mindset prevents unnecessary conflict and preserves humanity. Another psychological principle is response proportionality. Maintaining standards does not require escalation. Small misalignments need small responses. Major violations need distance. When every issue is treated the same, credibility erodes. Calibrated response signals intelligence. Another key point: high standards are enforced through behavior, not lectures. Explaining standards repeatedly turns them into requests. Behavior makes them non-negotiable. You don't need to announce consequences, you apply them calmly. Consistency teaches faster than explanation. Another important realization: flexibility does not mean self-abandonment. It means choosing compassion without compromising core values. You can be understanding without lowering expectations. Understanding explains, standards decide. Another psychological trap to avoid is performative toughness. Some people raise standards aggressively to prove strength. This creates resistance. Quiet standards create adjustment. Loud standards create opposition. Strength does not need volume. Another crucial element is self-application. High standards lose power when applied only to others. People notice inconsistency immediately. When you hold yourself to the same standard you expect, credibility multiplies. Another realization: maintaining standards requires emotional regulation. Reacting emotionally weakens authority. Responding calmly reinforces it. Calm enforcement communicates, this is not personal. This is how I operate. Another important truth: high standards simplify relationships. You argue less, you negotiate less, you explain less. Because expectations are clear, clarity reduces friction. Another psychological benefit: standards reduce resentment. When you tolerate less, you resent less. When you resent less, your presence improves. And improved presence reinforces respect naturally. The most important realization of this part is this: high standards are not walls, they are filters. They let alignment through and stop chaos quietly. When maintained with calm consistency, they never make you rigid. They make you clear. How high standards change your self-respect first. Before high standards change how people treat you, they change how you treat yourself. This is the part most people overlook. They expect standards to work outward first. They wait for others to adjust, to behave better, to show respect. But the first transformation is internal. High standards force clarity. You can no longer pretend you don't notice misalignment. You can no longer ignore discomfort. You can no longer rationalize behavior that drains you. This honesty with yourself is the foundation of self-respect. Another important shift happens immediately. You stop bargaining with your values. Low standards often come with internal negotiations. Just this once. It's not that bad. I don't want to make things awkward. High standards end negotiation, not aggressively, calmly. And calm finality is powerful. Another psychological change is reduced self-betrayal. Every time you tolerate what you know is wrong, you weaken trust with yourself. High standards restore that trust. You do what you said you would do. You follow through. You walk away when necessary. This consistency builds internal confidence. Not loud confidence, quiet certainty. Another internal shift is emotional relief. People often think standards create stress. In reality, low standards create stress. Because you are constantly managing frustration, resentment, and unspoken boundaries. High standards remove that burden. You stop carrying emotional debt, and emotional relief changes your presence. Your tone steadies, your reactions slow, your decisions feel cleaner. Another key transformation. You stop chasing understanding. When standards are clear, you no longer need everyone to agree. You need alignment, not approval. This frees enormous mental energy. Another psychological effect is identity reinforcement. High standards force you to define who you are and how you operate. Defined identity reduces doubt. Doubt invites manipulation. Clarity blocks it. Another important realization: self-respect grows when your actions match your internal standards. Words don't build self-respect, consistency does. And once self-respect stabilizes internally, external respect follows naturally. Another subtle but powerful change. You stop reacting to disrespect emotionally, not because it doesn't matter, but because your standards already decided. Decision removes emotional chaos. Chaos invites drama. Decision invites calm. Another truth most people miss: high standards make you feel stronger even before anyone else changes. Because strength comes from alignment, not reaction. The most important realization of this part is this: high standards don't start by changing others. They start by ending internal compromise. And once compromise ends, self-respect stabilizes. From that stability, everything else adjusts. The loneliness phase that comes with high standards. Raising your standards creates a gap, not immediately, but inevitably. It is the space between old dynamics ending and new ones forming. And that space often feels like loneliness. This is the phase that makes people doubt themselves. They notice fewer messages, less engagement, less emotional noise, and they assume something is wrong. But psychology tells a different story. Loneliness is not always loss. Sometimes it is transition. When standards rise, low-effort connections fall away quickly. High-effort connections move slowly. This timing mismatch creates silence. And silence feels uncomfortable if you are used to constant interaction. Another important truth: not everyone is meant to grow with you. Some people were compatible only with your lower standards. When those standards change, compatibility disappears. This is not betrayal, it is realignment. Another reason this phase feels lonely is identity adjustment. You are no longer over-available, overly forgiving, endlessly accommodating, and without those behaviors, some relationships lose momentum. Momentum was never connection, it was convenience. Another psychological shift here is withdrawal of emotional labor. You stop fixing, you stop soothing, you stop compensating. And when that labor ends, people who depended on it feel distance. This distance is not punishment, it is consequence. Another uncomfortable realization: during this phase, you may question your worth. Was I more likable before? Was I easier to be around? Did I lose something? What you lost was misalignment. What you gained is space. Space for people who can meet you without you shrinking. Another key point: loneliness feels worse when standards are inconsistent. If you raise standards and then lower them out of discomfort, confusion returns. Confusion invites testing. Testing recreates stress. Consistency shortens the loneliness phase. Another important truth: this phase teaches emotional independence. You learn to sit with silence without filling it, without chasing, without reverting. This builds inner stability. Inner stability becomes magnetic. But magnetism takes time. Another realization: the loneliness phase filters your self-trust. If you stay aligned here, you prove to yourself that your standards are real. And once you trust yourself, others begin to trust your boundaries. Another truth most people avoid: if you don't tolerate solitude, you will always tolerate disrespect. Solitude builds resilience. Resilience builds calm. Calm attracts respect. Another important shift: loneliness slowly becomes peace. Not excitement, not intensity. Peace. And peace is the foundation of healthy connection. The most important realization of this part is this: the loneliness phase is not a sign to lower standards. It is proof that they are working. Stay steady here, because what comes next will not require explanation. Why high standards create natural respect. At the end of everything, one truth becomes clear. Respect is not something you demand, it is something you design. High standards design the way people treat you, not through words, not through confrontation, but through consistency. When your standards are high, your behavior becomes predictable. Not emotionally predictable, structurally predictable. People know what effort is required, what behavior will not work, what access depends on, and clarity always creates respect. Another important realization: high standards remove negotiation. You don't argue, you don't convince, you don't explain repeatedly. You decide and move accordingly. Decision is powerful, because once a decision is made, emotion no longer controls behavior. And people feel that immediately. Another key truth: high standards make you calm. You are no longer reactive. You are no longer frustrated. You are no longer silently resentful. Calm presence changes everything. People lower their tone. They become more deliberate. They respect your time. Not because you force them, but because calm authority invites adjustment. Another realization: high standards protect your energy. You engage less, but more meaningfully. You speak less, but with weight. You walk away faster, but without drama. This efficiency improves presence, and presence is what people respond to first. Another psychological shift: you stop asking, why do people treat me this way? Because the answer becomes obvious. People treat you according to the structure you maintain. Structure beats intention every time. Another truth most people miss: high standards don't make you superior, they make you selective. Selectivity is not arrogance, it is self-respect in action. And self-respect is always respected. Another important realization: some people will never like your standards. That is fine. Standards are not for approval, they are for alignment. Alignment feels calm, approval feels temporary. Another final truth: when standards are real, you don't need to announce them. Your behavior communicates everything. You stay, you leave, you pause, you disengage, and people learn. The most important realization of this video is this: high standards don't change how people feel about you. They change how people behave around you. And behavior is what matters. When your standards are clear, consistent, and calmly enforced, respect becomes natural. Not loud, not forced. Natural.